Quick note before we start. This content is for educational purposes only. We are not promoting the use or purchase of any substances. Our goal is to explain science, regulation, and history. Always follow the laws in your country and consult licensed professionals for any health related questions.
Okay, we're recording. Welcome, Elliot, to AWA Academy. The idea of this session is to talk about psychedelics, about the economics of psychedelics today. I'm really excited because we have covered many of the topics, science topics. We have talked with therapists. We have talked with people that are advocates. And today we have the honor to have Elliot Marseille to be speaking about the economics of psychedelics, which is a really important part because it's not just about great results in clinical trials, it's also about how we can actually introduce this therapy into a healthcare system that it's already working. So, Elliot, it's a pleasure to have you here. I'll ask you to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Victoria. I'm really pleased to be here and to share some ideas with you. So you'd like me to introduce myself, right?
Of course.
Yeah, great. Okay. So my background is in global health economics. I spent most of the 80s in Nepal managing an eye care a national blindness prevention and control program. Returned to Berkeley, which is my home, Berkeley, California, after that. Did my doctoral in health policy and have spent most of my career on the economics of HIV treatment and prevention. And other diseases, other issues as well, but mainly HIV/AIDS. And then I had a serendipitous meeting with Rick Doblin, who is the founder of MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association.
He came to AWA Academy.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So you know who he is. I mean, more than any other single person, I think he deserves credit for the renewed interest in psychedelics that we've seen in the last 15 years, let's say, or so. So he and I had a sort of accidental meeting at Burning Man. And we got to talking, and he let me know that that MAPS at that time needed a health economist. And I said, well, I would be happy to lend my services. And so I gradually switched my focus away from the economics of global health and into the economics of the emerging psychedelic assisted therapies. And then about 6 years ago or so, I started a group at UC Berkeley called the Collaborative for the Economics of Psychedelics. And that's what I do full time now. We do a lot of things on the economics of psychedelics, but I would say the central question we're trying to answer, and Victoria, you touched on this in your introductory remarks, is how do we move from an understanding that this can be safe and efficacious for people to a place where it's actually available, accessible, affordable. And that's going to require that third-party payers, insurance companies, both public and private, are willing to cover it. Otherwise, this is nice for people who can afford to pay out of pocket, but it won't have a public health impact. And of course, that's ultimately what we're interested in.
Wow, that's an amazing work. And I'm pretty amazed that you're doing this as a full-time job. It's amazing. And how big is the team today?
Well, it's a little hard to answer that question because I have different teams for different projects. Some are at Berkeley, some are at other educational institutions. But I would say there's a network of maybe 12 of us who are working on various projects, most not full-time. I think I'm the only full-time person. So it's sort of this ad hoc, I put together ad hoc teams depending on the project that we're working on.
Wow. And Elliot, so much of the psychedelic research field has focused on the clinical efficacy and safety. And from your perspective as a health economist, what is important that we now start paying serious attention to the economics of psychedelic therapies? And Also, is this therapy more expensive or less expensive than a regular antidepressant therapy?
Yeah, good. So for a long time, the emphasis on the field has been on safety and efficacy, totally appropriate. It needs to be, and it should, and that focus will continue and should continue.
Of course.
At the same time, I think it's increasingly understood that unless we understand what it costs, unless we understand what the potential future savings are when people have been exposed to psychedelic therapy, and unless we know whether it's not only effective, but is it cost effective, until that happens, we're not going to get to the public health scale that we referenced earlier as being really the goal. And so I think people understand, we have to understand cost. We have to understand cost effectiveness, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute, but we also have to understand budget impact. You asked if these therapies are more expensive than or less expensive than conventional therapies. The short answer is they tend to be much more expensive up front, but have the potential to be less expensive over time. So if and we see some evidence of this, psychedelic therapies are more efficacious than standard of care therapies, over time, we could see a reduction in healthcare utilization as people's symptoms improve for PTSD or depression or generalized anxiety or disorder or alcohol use disorder and so on. So this is one of the big questions is how much reduction might we see in healthcare costs over time? We have a little window into that. We have some sense of it, but we don't really know yet, and it's one of the key questions in the field at this point.
Right. And can we dive a little bit more, deeper on the distinction between cost effectiveness and affordability for these kind of therapies?
Yeah. So I'm going to give first a technical answer, which may surprise people, but I'll try to explain it, and then go to sort of a more practical answer.
Okay.
The technical answer is if something's cost effective, it's affordable, because what it suggests is that you're getting more health benefit than something else. So in theory, you could introduce a more cost-effective therapy like a psychedelic assisted therapy and move a less cost-effective intervention out of your portfolio, so you're not covering that. So in that sense, you make room in your budget for the new therapy. So that's the technical answer. If it's cost-effective, it is affordable in theory. That's not very helpful, because in practice, it's difficult to stop a program that people are used to receiving. And as a practical matter, what we really want to know is how much increase in the budget in the short term will be required. So oftentimes, insurance company looks at per person per month cost, per person per month premium increases that would be required to fund a new intervention. And they may have some benchmarks of like what's acceptable and what's not. So budget impact is definitely something we look at independent of cost effectiveness. Yeah, it's a more practical metric.
Yeah, definitely. And so inside a psychedelic therapy, let's say MDMA or psilocybin, there are like many verticals or many things to look at when we're speaking about money, right? So there's a therapist, there's a physician, there's the drug. What is the most expensive part of the whole treatment?
So You're not going to like this answer. I don't really like it either, but the answer is it depends. It's actually worth spending a little time on that. So first of all, no besides Spravato, esketamine, no psychedelic medicine has yet been approved by the FDA. So we don't know what pharmaceutical companies will charge, but there's some hints that they may charge quite a lot. And so there's the cost of the drug, but then there's the cost of everything else. So the therapy is not, the intervention is not just the drug, as you know, it's this whole package. It's the therapy and the monitoring, and there's overhead that accompanies that as well. And so, and one of the difficulties we have, so let me just make a quick side comment before I go any further. A lot of my comments are going to pertain to the U.S. healthcare system, and I'm aware that a lot of members of our audience will be in other countries. So some of the remarks I make may apply more to our crazy, kind of chaotic healthcare system in the United States, and maybe a little less applicable to other countries. But the concern here is that insurance companies are used to evaluating drugs and sort of narrow interventions. They're much less used to providing coverage for packages of the interventions. There's some precedents, it has been done. And similarly, the FDA is much more comfortable evaluating the safety and efficacy of a drug rather than a drug plus psychotherapy, which is really what we're talking about here. So it's a little bit of a long-winded answer to your question, but what drives the cost, of course, is the cost of the drug itself. But it also has to do with how intensive the psychotherapeutic support is, or whether it's actually psychotherapy or more like emotional support that's short of formal psychotherapy, a sort of a hot topic in the field. And there's other moving parts here which we could talk about too that would determine what the total cost is.
Right answer. And that leads me to my next question, which is, I've seen that in much of your research, you explore group-based psychedelic therapy as a model and as a way to reduce cost and to increase access. So what are the economic advantages of these models, and what challenges would need to be addressed for them to become viable in an existent healthcare system?
Yeah, good. So group-based therapy is one way to reduce costs. And in a way, it's kind of obvious. If you have two therapists working with one client for as long as 6 or 8 hours, it's going to be a lot more expensive per client who completes the therapy than if there are, let's say, 6 clients in the room. So you might say, well, the factor is, you're reducing the therapy cost by a factor of 6 in the example I gave. It's not quite true. So in the group therapy regimens that have been tried, not all the sessions are group sessions. So it's not quite as efficient as you might think. And we evaluated two models of group therapy, one for MDMA for PTSD, and the group model that was presented there reduced the cost of therapy by about a half. And in the psilocybin for depression model we looked at, reduced it by, let's just say, roughly a third. So that's good. It's not, half or a third, that's significant. But it's not quite as spectacular as one might think it would be. However, there's another important dimension to group therapy, which is, and again, I'm speaking about the United States, although I suspect it's true for many other countries as well. In our country, there's already the demand for forget about psychedelic, conventional mental health and behavioral health services greatly exceeds supply. So there's already long waiting lists. The current volume of well-trained therapists is insufficient to meet the demand. And so now we're talking about bringing in a new kind of therapy. And so it's really important that we use the available person power as efficiently as possible. So if you're looking at models for scaling up psychedelic therapy for a given supply of trained clinicians, it can be scaled up much, much faster, assuming a group model than the more therapy-intensive interventions that have been tried up to date. The other question about group therapy is it as efficacious as individual therapy? And the therapists I've talked to believe that it is as efficacious or could be more efficacious. But really, we need a trial that proves that point or demonstrates it one way or the other. And I believe there's a trial underway now in Israel. They're recruiting, which is an actual head-to-head trial on group versus more individual therapy. So I think the results of that will be really important.
Yeah, well, as you said before, this is the kind of therapy which is not just a drug you take to your place, and it's the drug plus the package, as you say, it's plus the therapy and plus the work that person needs to do. So I think, yes, we should be looking at the drugs, the doses, but we should always be looking at the protocol as well. How are we leading people? How are we making people interact between each other? If there's a group, is there interaction? There's not interaction. So I think that's really interesting. And coming back to the healthcare system, and maybe we can talk about the US. What do you think insurance companies want to see to be able to fund and to cover this kind of therapies as a package?
Yeah, that's an extremely important question. So they care about cost effectiveness, but they care about a lot of other things as well. Within cost effectiveness, they want to know that a psychedelic therapy is cost effective, not compared with placebo, but compared with feasible, available standard of care treatments. That's really what we need to understand, because that's the real world alternative. They want to see trials that are strong and clean, that have clearly defined endpoints, where blinding is implemented as far as is feasible in the context of a clinical trial. Expectancy effects are minimized. In other words, they want to see trials that are as credible as the state of the art allows. And they want thorough adverse event reporting, because that's clearly a concern to them. The other thing is they're going to want to understand the durability of the benefits. We touched on this earlier. We need more long-term follow-up on people who have undergone psychedelic therapy, because again, it's expensive up front. So if people need to if they need to have the therapy reinforced every 3 or 6 months or 12 months, let's say, that's a very different picture than if it's much more durable. And so this is like one of the really important questions. With regard to MDMA for PTSD, we're getting a little bit of a signal that the benefits might, in fact, be very durable indeed. So that's encouraging. But it's too early to draw conclusions about like psilocybin for depression and other interventions. They also want they want a path toward being able to cover the whole intervention, like we were talking about before. They need They need to have reimbursement for the drug costs, plus therapist time, plus monitoring, facility use, and again, they want to know about any offsetting future healthcare spending. And then the other thing is they would like, I believe, to see evidence based on people in the real world. So in clinical trials, there are a lot of exclusion and inclusion criteria,
Yes.
which may make the participants quite different from who would actually be receiving therapy once it's FDA approved and implemented. So I think that's the other thing that they would want, is more real world evidence. And then, there's a whole administrative tangle of having appropriate coding, reimbursement pathways, provider certification, have standards for providers, and like that. So there's a wide range of conditions that need to be met beyond just affordability and cost effectiveness.
Yeah. Yes. This is why you're here, Elliot. This is why we really wanted to make this episode with you, because I think, again, we talk a lot about the trials, about the potential of psychedelics, and we get there, but there's a lot of much work to be done, and we need more people engaging, not just in the normal conversation of psychedelics, but also in the economics. My following question is, if you were looking ahead in a decade from now, let's say, what do you think that the most important economic structural problems are going to be, and what are if the main goal is that this is not just reduced to a small quantity of people accessing the treatment, what do we need to see in 10 years? Well, we have seen the part of the insurance companies,
Yeah.
but what else?
Yeah. So that's extremely important, is what we've been talking about so far, is giving payers the information they need to make a decision about coverage. There's tremendous amount of work to be done there. So the other kind of pathway here is, in the United States, there's Colorado and Oregon, when they have state regulated access to psychedelics. And that's a whole other model. So it's not clinical. In fact, the providers literally cannot say, we are here to treat your depression, although people with depression do come for those services.
Mm-hmm.
And an early signal that these non-clinical services, in fact, can be quite effective, both in alleviating symptoms of depression for people who are suffering, for example, from depression, or anxiety from people who are suffering from anxiety, but also people are reporting improved relationships, generally being happier. And so this is a whole other model. And I don't see them as competitive. I don't think it needs to be either or. What I would like to see in 10 years is that people who really need highly structured clinical services for severe mental or behavioral health issues get that, and that it is covered, and that others for whom that's not appropriate, or that's not their style, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
have access to safe, well-regulated access to psychedelics outside a clinical setting. So that's kind of, that's a whole other possibility that's opening up here.
Well, my last question was about that. Like, what would you like to see, like beyond healthcare system? What would you like to see? And I think that what you just said is super important because it's like it's about having the option. If you're already keen to trying mushrooms and I don't know, to go to a state where it's decriminalized or deregulated and you can get support and it can be good for you, then great. But if you want to have an actual prescription, I think that yes, you should be able to have it in a safe way because most of the people I know, and we talk about psychedelic treatments, they are like, okay, I trust what my psychiatrist says I have to do.
Yeah.
So, yes, send me all the papers you want, but I want my psychiatrist to give me a dose of something I really know what I'm having, that it's precise and it's on a paper.
Yeah.
um, and what do you think is going to happen this year for psychedelics? How are we finishing this year? From your opinion, from your perspective.
Oh, yeah. Do you mean in terms of my own work, what we're working on, and or
Yes, on your own work and on the field in general to
yeah.
close.
So a little bit about what we're doing. We have a paper under review on the cost effectiveness of psilocybin for smoking cessation. So this follows on the effectiveness work that Matthew Johnson did, comparing a session of psilocybin therapy for smoking cessation against standard of care nicotine patch. And psilocybin is dramatically more effective, and we found very favorable cost effectiveness results. So we're hoping to publish this soon. Yeah, I'm kind of excited about it because it's an application of psychedelics outside of mental health, really.
Mhm.
I mean, you could say tobacco addiction is a mental health issue. I don't know. That's fine. But
It's
I don't really.
behavior.
It's a behavioral issue, and although smoking rates have fallen dramatically in the United States, and I think worldwide,
Yes.
still a lot of people smoke. So anyway, so that's one that I'm excited about. The other one is we have a paper under review. So let me just back up for a minute. We know that psychedelics, in addition, like from the trials, we know that psychedelic therapies, in addition to alleviating symptoms of, let's say, depression or anxiety, people also report increases in positive well-being. So might be improved relationships, more access to joy, connection with nature, enjoying work more. And that doesn't get valued by the FDA in the clinical trials or by health economists right now. That in our formal models, all we're looking at is reductions in depression, and the secondary outcomes are kind of like, well, that's nice. That's interesting. People also feel better in other ways. And so we have a paper under review now that suggests that those secondary well-being measures be promoted to being co-primary outcomes. So reduction in symptoms, extremely important. I'm not knocking it. We need to do that. But in addition, let's look at these changes in well-being, including access to sort of positive affective states. And I think once those are included, psychedelics become still more attractive, because yeah. So that's a couple of the things that we're doing. I could say more, but maybe that's enough on that. For the field as a whole, boy, I don't know. I don't know if I have a good answer. Things are changing so fast, Victoria. I mean, of course, we're hoping to see MDMA approved as a legal medicine to be a huge breakthrough. It was a disappointment that the FDA did not approve it back last August. I believe they made a mistake. I think the evidence on safety and efficacy was sufficient, and other countries have looked at the same evidence and come to different conclusions. But nevertheless, there were some problems with the trials, and there were some things that could have been better. Although I'll just say parenthetically, I sometimes think that psychedelic therapies are held to a higher standard because kind of the stigma of psychedelics. No clinical trials are perfect. Anyway, so we want to see MDMA get approved as a medicine by the FDA ASAP. I don't have a crystal ball how quickly that will happen. Psilocybin for major depression or treatment-resistant depression, I think will be the next. Might even happen before MDMA. But I think that's going to be a watershed that, the approval of either MDMA or psilocybin is going to greatly increase the interest, and it's going to be a very encouraging sort of psychologically for researchers and clinicians and people who are suffering from depression and so on. So I think that's the big one. It's kind of obvious, but true nonetheless.
Yes, amazing. Well, for everyone watching, then we will ask Elliot to send us some of the links to his papers so that the people can dive deeper on these topics that for me are extremely interesting and important if you are interested in this particular field. And Elliot, I have to thank you so much for your time and for being here today. It has been a real pleasure.
It's been a pleasure for me too, Victoria. Thank you. Yes, it's been
Thank you very much.
All right.